In this video, we're going to use several of the methods from the previous videos to create a template in Excel which can be used to create an SQL statement. We're going to create three functions. The first two functions will work independently. In the first function, we will create a where clause from the customer list. In the second function, we will create the select clause using the listed aliases and only the highlighted values in columns A and B. The third function will call the other two functions to create the full SQL statement. We will use this SQL statement as a template. As always, you should only use SQL statements that have been tested in your system. This template can easily be reused on different customer numbers and highlighted fields. Changes to the join criteria should be tested in a development or testing environment before being executed on production. We are joining information from a customer information table to the sales agent information by the sales agent ID in the customer table. We are doing this for only the customers that are listed in the customer num column. The SQL statement uses two aliases for the table names, customer info as CI and sales agent as SA. In the VBA, we will start with a fresh module. We will call this new module SQL Mod. We're going to create a public function and call it special concat, mod. It will take one argument for the range of the where clause, and it will return a string of the concatenated list of customer IDs. We could ask the user for the column number instead of taking in the range and extracting it. This would mean that the user needs to count the number of columns. For this example, we are using column 5, but this function can be used with other datasets to create the where clause. To make it more user-friendly, we're going to ask for the range. We will need a variable for our last row, one for our concatenated string, one for defining the concatenated range, a variable to iterate through our for each loop that we will set to a variant, and a variable for the number of our last column. We will set the concat call to the column number of the where clause range that will be passed in by the user. We will use the usual method for finding the last row. We will set the concat range to start from the second row of our concat column to the last row. And we will initialize our concat string to an empty string. For the items in our where clause, we will use a for each loop to add them onto our string. We will put them in single quotes and separate them with a comma. Once we have our values in the string, we will trim the last comma and space. In previous videos, we have showed how to trim data as it comes in and how to deal with inconsistent data such as blank cells. We will keep this example simple, and you can add those checks to your code if necessary. Finally, we will make the function special concat, mod equal to the concat string, and this will put the string in the cell where we call the function. We will save this function, and in Excel, we will go and open the function options. We're in the user-defined functions. Click on our function and select a cell in the where clause column. We can see a preview of our product. So we'll click OK, and we have the list for our where clause. When we check this against our statement, it looks good. So now we want to write the function that will create the select clause, which will only pick up the highlighted cells, and we will add the table aliases at the beginning of each field name. Back in the VBA, we're going to create a public function and call it SQL Select Mod. We're going to take 3 arguments for the number of the columns, the 2 tables, and the list of aliases. And we will return the select string. For this function, we are going to ask the user for the column number because it is more specific for this template, and the column numbers will be the first 3. You can refactor the code so that it asks for the range and extracts the column number as we've done in the previous function, if you need to make it more user-friendly for your purposes. We will need two variables for the last row in each of the field listings. We will need a string for our concatenated list. We need two string variables for our aliases. The select val will be used to iterate through our loops. We will store the interior color, which is the highlight color, in a long variable. For more information about the interior color and how to use it, please watch the 6th video in this series. We will set our two variables to find the last row of the field lists. So we will borrow this method from our where clause function and change the column variables to pull from the first two columns. And we're going to hard code our alias values again. And I see I have a spelling error. That should be alias, not alien. Next, we will initialize the concat string to an empty string. We will initialize the interior color to the interior color value of cell A1. We're going to iterate through each of the column field names, and if the interior color is not white, as it is in cell A1, we will bring the value of that cell into our string and add the alias for that table, and then add a comma. We're going to create two for loops to concatenate our field names from each table, and simply change the column numbers and alias values. Our concat string will be passed into one and then into the second. At first glance, you will notice that we're using repetitive code. We could design this to use one for loop and have it take in arguments for column number and the alias value. You could even take the whole thing and create a separate module. But before we get carried away, we need to think about readability. These for loops are simple, and there are only two of them. If you have three or more, you may want to consider a single loop with an outer loop that iterates through a list of arguments. If your code could be used in multiple macros, you may want to consider making a module. But for readability and simplicity, we're going to repeat this simple for loop and change the column numbers and alias values. Once our string goes through both loops, we will trim the last comma and space. Then we will add the word select to the beginning of the string. And finally, we will set the function SQL select mod equal to the concat string. We will save this, and in Excel, we will call the function, add our column values, click OK. Oh, it looks like something's wrong, so let's go back to our code and check that. I see it. We need to change our second loop to use the last row number 2. So we'll save this. In Excel, we will call the function again. Now we have our preview, so it shows that this is working. This looks good. We have the fields that are highlighted in green with the proper aliases. Now we're going to create the SQL statement by calling these two functions. Back in the VBA, we will create a new public function and call it SQL full statement mod. And it will take 5 arguments. 5 arguments for each of the column ranges. And at the end, we will add as string to clarify the data type that will be returned. We will need a variable for our SQL string. We will need a variable for our strings that will be returned by our function calls. We will need 2 strings for our alias values. We need 5 long values for the columns that we will extract from the range values that get passed in. So next we're going to extract those column numbers. We will set our first concat mod string to the string that will be returned when we call the SQL select mod function. We will enter the column number variables as our arguments. We will set our second concat mod string to the string that will be returned from the special comma mod. Next, we will hardcode our alias values. We will initialize the SQL string. So first we're going to build our SQL where clause. And we will add where and add the alias and a dot and the field name, which we're going to get from the first cell of the customer numbers. We add the word in and an open parentheses, add the second concat string, and a closing parentheses. Now we're going to build our full SQL statement. We will bring in the first concat mod string, which starts with select and contains all our field names. We will add the word from, and we will get the first table name from the header and add a space and the alias value. You could add the SQL keyword as here, but it is usually not required. Next, we will state our join type, which is an inner join, and add our second table name from the header, and add a space, and our second alias value. And we'll add the word on with spaces. We will add our alias value and a dot to the first join value in the join column, and make it equal to the second value in the join column. And finally, we will add a space and our SQL list that contains the where clause. It looks like I missed something. Yes, here it is. I missed the closing parentheses. So we'll save this function. And in Excel, we will call the function. We will select all of our columns and click OK. It looks like we have another error. Duplicate declaration and current scope. That means we have 2 variables with the same name. Yes, we did not change the second mod string to 2. So we fix that and hit reset just in case. That should get rid of anything that might be hanging out in our variables. And we'll save this. We will rerun all of the functions. Now we have our full statement. So we'll copy this and paste it into Notepad++. And this looks good. Separate it out a little bit so that you can see that it is the same statement. Now that we've tested our setup with a functioning statement, we can add and remove fields as needed and change the customer numbers. With this example, you can see that there are ways to set up your macros to fit a number of your needs. You can have functions and subroutines to create SQL parts as needed, and you can use those to create entire SQL statement templates.